just about 2 weeks, begins the month of Elul. We'll be resuming our the classes on August 27th, which is already in Elul, well into Elul, just a week before Rosh Hashanah. But the month of Elul has great significance in Jewish life. As Rabbi Solomon discussed 2 weeks ago, the seasons and the times and the days that things occur carry great significance in Jewish thought and Jewish life. When on the 17th of Tammuz, when we fast over the destruction, over the Romans breaking into coming into Jerusalem, many years before that, thousands of years before that, that was the day that Moshe broke the tablets when he saw the Jews worshiping the golden calf. That was the 17th of Tammuz. After that, the next day he went back up for another 40 days to supplicate to God and ask him to forgive the Jews. That ended at the end of Av, and on the first day of Elul, God called Moshe up to present him with the second tablets. And Moshe was there for another 40 days, and on the 40th day is Yom Kippur, and that is when God said, Salachti kidvarecha, I forgive as you have asked me to. So the month of Elul begins our time of introspection, our time of thinking, and it really represents our connection with God. One of the acronyms that Elul stands for is Ani l'dodi v'dodi li. I am to my beloved, and my beloved is to me. It signifies our relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, with God, and that relationship, as we curry it, as we build it, as we develop it, and nurture it, leads us to repentance, leads us to do the right thing, and leads us to connect with God in preparation for Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, which are the days when we proclaim God's kingdom and we ask for His mercy. During the month of Elul, there are several customs. In the Ashkenazi community, generally, the shofar is blown every day, every morning, after the morning services, after Shacharis, until the day before, 2 days before Rosh Hashanah. The day before Rosh Hashanah, the shofar is not blown. And we begin to say a psalm, Davar Hashem Ori V'yishi, in which David speaks of how God has protected him and how God has served as his protector from his enemies. That's what the month of Elul is again. So the month of Elul is one where we seek to connect with HaKadosh Baruch Hu and God, and that's what it's all about. And we should all have success in doing so. There's a story in London in the 1930s or 40s, and the head of the Beth Din in London, the head of the rabbinic court in London at the time, was a great scholar. His name was Rabbi Cheskel Abramsky. He later moved to Israel. He was head of the rabbinic court there from 1934 to 1951. One of the functions of the London Beis Din was to give supervision on butcher stores, other places that food was served, and give them kosher certification. One such establishment was deemed to be in violation of kosher law, and the Beis Din withdrew their supervision of the butcher store. The butcher store responded by taking the Beis Din to court and suing for them to reinstate his certification. Called to the stand was Rabbi Abramsky. And after he took his oath, or his affirmation as the case may be, the judge turns to him and says, Rabbi, or the lawyer, and he says, Rabbi, what are your qualifications to determine whether or not this person is in violation of kosher law, whether or not this establishment is kosher or not? So Rabbi Abramsky responded, well, I am one of the world's leading Torah scholars. I'm an acknowledged expert on Jewish law. People from all over the world turn to me with their questions. Certainly here in England, I am among the leading rabbis, and that's what qualifies me. I've studied Torah for many years, I've studied Jewish law for many years, and everybody in the world acknowledges me as a Torah scholar. So the judge turns to Rabbi Abramsky and says, Rabbi, may I ask you, isn't humility a trait that's valued in Judaism? So Rabbi Abramsky said, yes, it is, Your Honor, but I'm under oath. Gemara tells us, Ben Zoma, one of the scholars of the Mishnah, one of the sages of the Mishnah, Tana, was once ascending the Har Habayis Temple Mount, and he saw thousands and thousands and thousands of Jews who were streaming to the temple. And the Mishnah tells us the halacha is that if a person sees 600,000 Jews, there's a special blessing that he makes. That blessing is, Baruch Chacham Harazim, blessed is he who knows all the secrets. God creates all men, God knows what their thoughts are, and in a group of 600,000 people, we say that essentially should include every stream of thought that there could be, and therefore we bless God who knows who knows what's going on in all these different people. And then he said another curious thing. So Baruch Shebarach Elu L'Sham Sheni, and blessed is he who created all these people to serve me. Curious remark. Humility is a virtue in Jewish life. Then he explained. He said, Adam, if he wanted bread, he had to take it, plow the field, plant the field, water the field, cut it, went through all the steps to make bread. If he wanted clothing, he had to shear the wool or pick the cotton, and he had to spin it. And meat, he said, I go to the store, and there are bakers, and I could just go and buy bread. There are tailors who will just make me clothes. I don't have to go through all those many, many, many steps. And he said, Orach tov mahu omer. What does a good guest say? A person comes to visit. A good guest says, boy, my host, he gave me this delicious meal. He served me all this great food. He said, all this he did for me. I'm so grateful to him for doing it. What does a bad guest say? Yeah, he was serving his family that supper anyway. Just, they threw in an extra piece of chicken for me. But Ben Zoma recognized very interesting, he represented a very interesting teaching that the Talmud tells us. Why was man created alone as an individual? Only one man was created. Only one being was created initially. The Talmud tells us because man has to say, Bishvili nivra ha'olam. All the entire world, the entire universe was created because of me. For me. The world is here because of me. Now, true, everybody else gets to say the same thing. So what does that mean? Why is the world here because of me? It's here because of you, it's here because of you, it's here because of everybody in this room, right? Everybody in this room says, Bishvili nivra olam, the world exists because of me. So what does that mean? If it was created for me, it wasn't created for you. Let's take a step back. Abraham, our forefather Abraham, when he referred to himself, he said, Anochi afar ve'efer, I am but dust and ash. True humility. Yet, for tens of years, he stood up and he fought the world. He disagreed with everybody. That's not humility. That's courage. That's strength. You'd think. When Lot was captured by 4 kings, Abraham set out in war to recapture his nephew. That takes valor. That takes strength. Are those signs of humility? Moshe, our great teacher, Moshe. He's considered, the Torah tells us, he was the most humble of people. Let's look at an episode in the Torah. The Torah tells us that as God commanded Moshe about how the land of Israel would be divided between the tribes. And the head of every household was allotted a portion, and that would go to his children and to their children, and that's how the land would pass on. There was a group, there was a family, the daughters of Tzlafchat. Their father had died. He was no longer eligible to get a portion of the land, it would appear. What does Moshe tell them? Wait a moment while I ask God what we should do. The Talmud comments how fortunate is a generation that their leader can go and say, okay, I'm going to go ask God, and be certain that God's going to answer him on the spot. I mean, I could tell anybody, I'll go ask God, but everybody knows that God's not answering me. Think of it. Is that humility? Moshe prayed to God v'es Hanan. In this past week's Torah portion, v'es Hanan, he asked God to grant him his wish. V'es Hanan comes from the term chen, grace. He asked God, I don't deserve this. I'm not deserving of this. What do you mean? He just spent 40 years leading the Jewish people. He took on the leadership role despite the fact that he didn't want to. He confronted Paro. He told Paro, tonight at midnight this is going to happen. He told him tomorrow this is going to happen. He did everything God wanted him to do. Yet, comes to God, v'es Hanan. He pleads with him. I'm not deserving. The same humble person, when it comes to killing the giant kings, Sichon and Og, who stood up against the Jews, he took the lead and he killed them. And when the Jews were at war, Moshe went up onto the mountain and he knew that he lifted his hands. True, the Jews would be victorious. True, he knew that was because the Jews would look up and they'd think of God and they'd do tshuva. But he knew his power. Yet he asked for v'es Hanan. Talmud tells us about a sage called Hillel. Does everybody here know the story of Hillel? Hillel was a very poor man. He started off as a very poor man. He used to work collecting wood. And every day, he'd earn 1 coin. He'd use half that coin to provide for himself and his family, and the other half was given to the guard at the study hall to allow him to enter. I guess they wanted to keep vagrants out. They had a guard at the study hall. One Friday, Hillel didn't earn a whole coin. He only earned half a coin. He had to provide for his family. He went to the guard at the door and he said, "Please let me in. I'll pay you next week." The guard said, "No. Pay me or you don't go in." He pleaded with him, I pay you every day. I'm reliable. You know who I am." "No. Half a coin or you don't get in." So what did Hillel do? That day, two great sages, Shmai and Naftalion, were teaching in the study hall. Hillel clawed his way onto the roof of the building. And he laid himself down on a skylight, to listen, put his ear to the glass, and hear what they had to teach. And as he lay there, the snow began to fall. And he was oblivious to the snow because he was busy listening to the lecture. And slowly but surely, he was trapped by the snow. And he was laying under the snow overnight. Till the next morning, when Shmai and Naftalion came into the study hall, they said, "It looks a little dark in here. What's going on?" They went onto the roof and they found Hillel there. They took him down. They took care of him. I don't think he had problems getting into the study hall after that. But Hillel is considered, the Talmud tells us, a person should always be humble like Hillel. Hillel, when he was already the leader of Israel, poor man came. This poor man used to be a wealthy man. He had once been extremely wealthy, so wealthy, in fact, that he had a crier going ahead of him announcing, "Yankel Shmerel is coming, Yankel Shmerel is coming." And now he couldn't afford anything. But Hillel couldn't afford to get him a crier. So what did Hillel do? He himself ran in front of this man. We all know the story about this cop that pulls over, that the Pope goes on a trip, and he asks the chauffeur, "We're up here in the mountains. I always want to drive, fast, but I can't really drive when I'm around. So when people are around, so we're up here in the mountains. Why don't you let me take the wheel?" And the driver says, "Okay, go right ahead." The driver goes into the back seat. The Pope sits himself down behind the wheel. He starts up the car, and he starts driving 70, 80, 90 miles an hour. He's speeding along up and down these winding roads in the mountains. All of a sudden, the cop pulls him over, and he lets his base know that he's pulling somebody over. Pulls over the car, goes over. The Pope opens the window, goes back to his car. He calls the base. He says, "Chief, we got a problem." He goes, "What's the problem?" He says, "I pulled over this car with this very important guy in it." He says, "Who is he?" He says, "I don't know, but the Pope is his chauffeur." Hillel, the Prince of Israel, was running in front of this fellow, announcing, "This guy is coming. Yankel Shmerel is coming. Yankel Shmerel is coming." This is Hillel, the most humble of people. He came from the most humble of places, and he was the most humble of people. There was once a bet. Two guys had a bet. They bet 400 coins. One of them bet the other one 400 coins that he could get Hillel upset. He was the most forgiving of people. What did he do? Friday afternoon, Hillel's getting ready for Shabbos, and this guy comes outside screaming, "Who here is Hillel? Who here is Hillel?" Not rabbi, no titles of respect, nothing. Who here is Hillel? This is a very important question to ask you. What's the question? Why do Babylonians have round heads? And Hillel says, "Oh, that's a very good question." He answers him. The guy leaves, waits for Hillel to get back into the shower, comes back a short time later, says, "Where's Hillel? Where's Hillel? Where's Hillel?" Hillel gets himself dressed again, comes down. "How can I help you, my son?" He says, "Why do these other people, Tarsim, why do they have round eyes?" So Hillel answers him. Guy leaves. Hillel goes back into his shower. Guy comes back a little while later. "Where's Hillel? Where's Hillel? Why do the Africans have flat feet?" And Hillel tells him. And the guy says, "I have a lot of questions." So Hillel says, "No problem, ask them." So he says, "But I'm scared you're going to get upset at me." He says, "I'm not going to get upset at you. Ask me as many questions as you want." So the guy says, "Are you the leader of the Jews? You Hillel, are you the guy they call the prince of the Jews?" He says, "Yeah." He says, "Well, I hope that nobody else is like you." He goes, "Why not?" He goes, "Because I just lost $400 on the bet." So Hillel said, it's worthwhile losing $400, another $400, so that I shouldn't, rather than me getting upset. So this was a man who really you'd think had no dignity, no self-respect. Yet, at the same time, he once walked into a town He once returned to his city. He had been traveling. He walked back into a city, and he heard an alarm sounded. People were screaming for help. And he said, I'm certain that that's not in my home. And the Talmud says, Nachon libo batuach b'Hashem, that embodies the verse, establishes the person who has faith in, who has confidence in God. This same humble person was able to say with certainty that he's so close to God that he knows nothing happened in his home, in his absence. This was a man, during Chol HaMoed on Sukkot, at the temple, there was a water drawing ceremony. They called it Simchas Beis HaShoeva. They would draw water, and everybody would come, and they'd celebrate. These were for libations on the altar, for water libations on the altar, which were done on Sukkot. And the significance of this was twofold. First of all, the libations had to do with the bounty that would be the Jews with which the world would be blessed. And it was a very esoteric time. It was a very, very, very holy time. It was a time, the Talmud tells us, that they used to call it the ceremony, the celebration of the drawing, of the house of the drawing, but they didn't just draw water, they also drew divine inspiration. And the great rabbis would come, and this one would juggle, and this one would this, and they'd all be ecstatic in their joy in communing with God. And Hillel would come, and he would say, if I'm here, everybody's here. And if I'm not here, who's here? This is the same fellow who wouldn't get upset when somebody pulled him out of the shower 3 times. This is the same fellow who went running in front of some deranged pauper to make him feel good. This is the same fellow who's ready to risk his life to go listen to a Torah lecture. Yet, if I'm here, everybody's here. No, it's true. Some of the commentators say he's talking about the divine spirit. He wasn't talking about himself. But the simple meaning, and many of the commentators, the Talmud Yerushalmi certainly seems to indicates that Hillel was talking about himself. What happened to his humility? One of the great Musar masters, Avrohom Biderman, Mashgiach in Mir Yeshiva, in pre-war Mir Yeshiva, used to say that a person who doesn't recognize his faults is sick. He has an illness. He has a malady. He suffers from a malady. But a person who doesn't recognize his qualities is dead. He's not alive. Because every person has to recognize that there's a divine spark within him. That he's not just here to eat and drink. He's not just flesh and bones. Hillel, when he finished studying with his Talmidim each day, he'd walk out with them, and they asked him, where are you going? He said, I'm going to do a mitzvah. He said, what's the mitzvah? He said, I'm going to the bathhouse to take a bath. What's the mitzvah about that? He said, think about it. When they have the statues of the emperors in the street, the city has people coming and cleaning them. Nobody wants the emperor's visage to be sullied by dirt, by dust, by the elements. They take care of it. They have people that tend to those statues. It says God made us in His image. If I'm a reflection of God of some sort, in some way, if I embody a soul, then I have to take care of that body, at least as much as they take care of a statue which is dead. So it's a mitzvah for me to go to the bathhouse. It may not be a mitzvah when I go to the bathhouse, but it would certainly be. But if that's what you're thinking, that becomes a holy act, because he recognized what he was really about. Once saw a T-shirt said, I know I'm special because God don't make junk. Bishvili nivra ha'olam. All the world is here because of me. But what does that mean? At the beginning of his classic work of ethics, Silas Yesharim, Rabbi Moshe Chaim Lutzato, lived in the early 18th century. He begins his work saying Yesod HaChasidus, the foundation of piety, V'shoresh ha'avodat tmima, the root of complete service of God, who sheyizbarer v'yisames eitzel ha'adam, that should be clear and should be validated by a person, ma chalvaso ba'olama, what his obligations are in his world. That last word is a little confusing. Moshe Chaim Lutzato was known to be extremely precise in his language. He didn't say, what is the role of that person? The person has to know his role in the world. It says he has to know his role in his world. Because each one of us, the world was created for me, the world was created for you, the world was created for you. To quote the American poet John Holmes, it is well to remember that the entire population of the universe, with one trifling exception, is composed of others. We are who we are. Hillel, the same Hillel, the sage, he made a remark, he said, Imein ani li mili, u'ch'ani la'atzmi ma'ani. If I am not for myself, who will be for me? I have to achieve, I have to accomplish. But yet, v'shani la'atzmi, when I'm on my own, ma'ani, what am I? Each individual, the word shvil, it's a very interesting word because it doesn't only mean because, bishvili, doesn't only mean because of me. There's another term, and there's another meaning to bishvili. Homiletically, this phrase is interpreted to refer to that other translation. Shvil is a path. Bishvili nivra ha'olam. Because of my path, the world was created. Nobody here was put here. Nobody was put onto this world with no purpose, with no reason, with no mission, with nothing to accomplish, with nothing to achieve. Bishvili, because of my path, that's why I'm here. Rav Moshe Chaim Lutzato is telling us, a person has to know what his place is in his world, in his universe, in his role, of the dynamic of the millions and billions of people in this world. Every person here has a role to play. Because if you didn't have a role to play, just like God doesn't make junk, He doesn't make things that don't mean anything and have no purpose. Hillel says, if I'm here, everybody is here because I'm here. Because my world is complete when I'm here. But if I'm not here, then everybody else could be here and it won't make any difference. Because I didn't fulfill my mission. It's a famous, I forgot which yeshiva was in Europe, there was a rule that everybody had to come to daven with the yeshiva's minyan. However, when one of the boys was out sick, the mashgiach, was one of the great Musar masters, said, when one bacher is out, there's no yeshiva. Because the yeshiva is not complete. We can't have a rule that you have to daven with the yeshiva when the yeshiva is not the yeshiva. The yeshiva is comprised of all its elements. The world is comprised of every one of us. Every one of us is a tzelem Elokim. Every one of us is a reflection of God's power. The Talmud tells us that why was man created on Friday? So it tells us two reasons. Because if a man starts thinking highly of himself, we tell him, a gnat was created before you were. A flea was created before you were. You came after the flea. And then there's another answer. The other answer is that when a king invites people to a party, What does he do? He has the table set, he has the food ready, the chefs are all standing in their hats at the chafing dishes, and that's when the guests come in. Man is the height of creation, the apex of creation. He's the purpose of creation. The world was created because of man. The world was created so each one of us should fulfill our purpose here. The whole world had to be ready, just like a party. God created the party. He set the table, he had all the dishes put out, everything was set, and now the guests come in. That's when man comes in. The great Hasidic master, Rabbi Simcha Bunim of Prishischa, who lived in the 1800s, I believe, early 1800s, used to say that every person has to have two pockets. One pocket holds a slip that says, Bishvili nivra olam. The world was created because of me. His other pocket has a little slip of paper that says, Va'anochi afar ve'efer, I'm dust and ashes. I'm worthless. Humility is a virtue in Judaism. Not only is it a virtue in Judaism, it's a command in Judaism. God says, I can't live with a person who's arrogant. I can't live in one roof. Doesn't say that about other affairs. But a person who's arrogant, God says, I can't stand him. I can't bear to be with him. But humility doesn't demand that we don't understand our qualities. We're human beings. We were invested with a holiness. We're expected, just like Hillel went to the bathhouse to take care of this reflection of his master. We have to have a moral standard, an ethical standard, that reflects that as well. That's when it's b'shvili nivra olam. That's when the world is created because of me. Going back to Hillel. Hillel, I won't call him a nemesis, but there was another scholar who was Hillel's colleague. Together, Hillel was the prince. Shammai was the head of the rabbinical court. He was the chief rabbi of the rabbinical court. And they had two very different approaches to things. And Shammai, the Talmud tells us, if he found something good food on Sunday, he'd say, I'm buying this for Shabbos, I'm putting it away for Shabbos. If he found another thing on Monday, he'd say, I'm buying this for Shabbos, let's forget about that one, because this is better than that. And throughout the week, every time he saw something good, he'd put it away for Shabbos. Hillel mida acheres haisalai. Hillel had a different approach to life. Hillel had a different approach to things. Baruch Hashem yom yom. Thank God each day. I bless God every day. Every day God is going to provide me with what I need. That's nachon libi batuach b'Hashem. Nachon libi batuach b'Hashem. That's the person who has confidence. His approach was to have such complete and utter confidence in God that he didn't have to shop on Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday for Shabbos. When I get on Sunday, we'll eat on Sunday. And I'm certain that by Thursday, Friday, when I'm preparing for Shabbos, I'll be granted what I need. Hillel went through his life like that. Bishvili, everything that comes my way, everything that happens to me, nivra olam, that's why I'm here. The Talmud tells us a very interesting thing, because in the same, there's a Mishnah in Avos, in Pirkei Avos, that teaches us the teachings of Hillel. One of those teachings is Negid Shema Avad Shemei. A person who wants his name to be spread out, who wants to become famous, Avad Shemei, he will lose his name. He was the prince of Israel, but it wasn't a personal agenda. He was able to get away with saying it. The Talmud says that a heavenly voice once rang out and said, there's somebody in this room who really is worthy of having the divine presence rest on him, and all his colleagues looked at him, at Hillel. Hillel had 80 students. The greatest of them is Yonasan ben Uziel. The smallest of them was Rav Yochanan ben Zakkai. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, the Talmud tells us, knew every facet of Torah learning and general knowledge. Yet he was the smallest of Hillel's disciples. Yonasan ben Uziel was so holy that when he studied Torah, a fire would come out. And if a bird passed over his head, the bird would be burnt. So they once asked the Gerer Rebbe, the Meriamas, they asked him, if that's how great the disciple was, how great was Hillel? He says Hillel was so great that he was able to make sure nobody saw the fire. He was able to hold it in. But Hillel told us something else. The Talmud tells us, Af hu ra'a gulgolas achas shetzafa pnei hamayim. Hillel also saw a skull that was floating on the water. And he said, Al da'atef tatfuch atafayach yetufan. You drowned other people. There's a discussion among the commentators. Did he know whose skull it was? Did he recognize whose head it was? He said, you drowned others, and those who killed you will themselves, those who drowned you will themselves ultimately be drowned. It's a very strange phrase, though, because the Mishnah begins by telling us, Af hu ra'a. Also, he saw. What's also? It's a new teaching. It's not following anything else. What's the also? And it's been explained that many people saw this skull, but the skull didn't say anything to them. It didn't speak to them. They didn't recognize that if they encountered this, it's here to teach them a lesson. Hillel also saw the skull, but him it taught a lesson. He said, Bishvili, if this crossed my path, if this came my way, it's here to teach me something, it's here to tell me something. It must be telling me the laws of divine retribution. You killed others, you were killed, those who killed you will be killed. Afhu. Thousands of people saw the skull. Nobody didn't say anything to anybody. Hillel recognized his role and that everything that comes his way is his role. The Gemara tells us that a person who does, everybody starts with a chelik in Gan Eden. Everybody starts with a portion of the world to come. Zacha, person who merits it, ultimately gets his portion and the portion of others. Those who don't lose their portion, they take their portion someplace else, they take other people's portion someplace else. Isn't Gan Eden big enough? I assume that heaven is big enough to have portions for everybody. This person is more righteous, let him get more. But why does he get the other guys? And the answer is because everybody has a role to play in this world. If this person was righteous and he went beyond what he did this other person's purpose as well. The people who were in Zocha, the people who didn't merit, the people who didn't act responsibly, forfeited their portion because they forfeited their role. The person who picked up their role is the person who gets their portion. We all know, many of you probably read the story, The Secret Life of Walter Mitty. No? Okay. James Thurber wrote a short story. I'm going to make it very quick. Walter Mitty was a nebuch. His wife would hound him. He was a henpecked husband. And he'd always have these delusions of grandeur. He's driving along and he imagines he's piloting a fighter plane. He goes to the store, he puts on his gloves, and he passes a hospital, and suddenly he imagines that he's this big surgeon. They called in the biggest doctors, and the biggest doctors called him in to deal with some patient. The whole story is four scenes. Walter Mitty didn't fill his role because he was looking at other roles. Hillel recognized, and all these sages, Ben Zoma, Moshe Rabbeinu, Avrohom Avinu, they realized that being humble doesn't mean caving in. Being humble doesn't mean not being courageous. Being humble doesn't mean not standing on principle. Being humble means that I am humble before God. Being humble means that I recognize that every achievement that I have comes from God. Being humble means that Moshe, who Hashem speaks to face, as it were, Moshe Rabbeinu, who could turn to Hashem and say, tells the people, hold on a minute, I'm going to consult with God, and God actually speaks to him then. He knows how great he is. He knew how great he was. Rabbi Tzadok, one of the great Hasidic masters about a century ago, used to say that just like a person has to believe in God, he has to believe in himself. But he doesn't have to believe in himself to accomplish. He has to believe in himself to try to accomplish. That he has abilities, that God put him here for a reason. We're all here because Chayev Adam Lomar, the Gemara says. We are obligated to say Bishvilin V'Roilam. I'm here for a reason, I'm here for a purpose, I'm here for a goal. And I recognize that when I achieve that goal, I do so with God's help and with the talents that God gave me. Moshe Rabbeinu said, I didn't make myself smart, I didn't make myself great, I didn't make myself a leader, God gave me those talents. Somebody once asked somebody information, I remember, about a prospective marriage partner, about a shidduch. And they asked, what's this guy like? They said, oh, well, he's handsome, and he's smart, and he's wealthy. And the person who asked the question said, okay, God gave him all that. What did he do with it? Each one of us has wealth, has abilities, has talents. And it's our responsibility to make the most of them. And then we'll have a wonderful Elul and a wonderful New Year. Any questions? Shifi, want to take mine? Any questions? No questions?
Any
Perfect.
question or comments?
I have to look online myself.
Rabbi, thank you for enlightening us. Can you give us a little bit of background on the Mikvah? Because I know you were talking about Hillel and the need to stay clean and so on. Where did the concept of the Mikvah exactly come from? Was it
The Torah discusses the Mikvah. We have to wash ourselves in different forms of impurity. We're cleansed by different forms of Mikvah. Certain things required a Mikvah, certain things required live water, a live stream. Most impurities could be cleansed. Spiritual impurities could be cleansed by. It's not a matter of hygiene.
So is there? I'm trying to understand. So why do we not go? Are there people that go to mikveh every day?
Well, so we are defiled, spiritually defiled. In other words, there's a concept that we've all come into contact with a dead body, with a corpse. We've come in contact with other forms of with other things, dead insects, all sorts of other things that would potentially defile us. We don't live in a society where we can. First of all, we can't cleanse ourselves from the tumas mace, because when we get defiled by a dead body, that has to come with sprinkling the water of the red cow, which we don't have. So we don't. Those laws, in that sense, don't apply. They apply to women in terms of nida, that requires cleansing before she could be with her husband, and other than that, there are different customs. Some people go every day because they feel it brings to more kedusha. One of the Hasidic rabbis once said that there's something that's not a mitzvah that brings to the biggest, that could lead somebody to the biggest mitzvahs, and there's something that's not an avera, not a sin, that could lead somebody to the worst sins. He says mikvah could lead a person to do the greatest mitzvahs, even though it's not a mitzvah to go to the mikvah. And depression, there's no sin to be depressed, but it'll lead a person to the greatest sins. So mikvah, going to the mikvah, some people have a custom to go Erev Shabbos on Fridays in preparation for Shabbos to elevate their spiritual level. Others go before the holidays. Others go only before Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur.
So if you feel troubled, let's say, you had a bad day or something bad is happening around you, does it make, can you just go to the mikvah that day and feel better? I'm trying to understand, like, spiritually.
No, it doesn't. If you want to, the Gemara said, the Pasuk, there's a verse in Tehillim. It says, Torah Hashem tamima meshivas nafesh. God's Torah is complete, and it relaxes. It settles the spirit.
So you learning Torah is the answer.
The Gemara says in several cases, if you have a headache, learn Torah. Other parts hurt, learn Torah, and it'll resolve itself.
One more question.
Sure.
You mentioned the fact that everybody, has a talent, and they should explore their talent, act on their talent, and so on. So if you're a person who doesn't recognize your talent, does the Torah give you a guide to find that talent so you can contribute?
The Torah tells us that you have a talent. I don't think the Torah can give you a generic, aptitude test for your talents. But generally people can figure out what they do right, or their friends can tell them what they do right. It helps to have good friends. The Shlomo Melech says a close neighbor is better than a distant brother. And a good friend is usually in a position where a rabbi who you're very close to could possibly help you. They have life coaching today. They're all over the place.
Yeah.
But,
so what if you have a talent for bad things? Like, let's say you're a very successful thief.
Okay. The Gemara tells us. No, the Gemara tells us. One of the sages of the Talmud was actually Shubin Prachya? No, Rabbi Nachman Bar Yitzchak, I think it was. When his mother was pregnant, an astrologer told her that they knew real astrology then, not Gene Dixon. He said that your son is going to grow up to be the world's greatest thief, the most outstanding thief of the generation. So she went to her rabbi. She says, "What am I supposed to do?" So he gave her two solutions. He said, first of all, walk by the study hall and keep him in the study hall and keep his head covered at all times. Keep his head covered at all times. When he was already an accomplished sage, his head covering once fell off. And the Talmud tells us he was already a respected rabbi. Everybody knew who he was. He was sitting under a tree studying, it seems, and his yarmulke fell off, his head covering fell off. He jumped up onto the branch, it was somebody else's tree, and he bit off the branch to steal the fruit. That's how motivated he still was. How did he use his talent? He was the greatest expert on financial halacha in his generation. Everybody came to him with questions of financial issues because he knew about money. He knew about all the halachas of money, all the intricate halachas of money, of financial dealings. And therefore he became the greatest sage. The Talmud tells us if a person wants to be has a talent, he's a little bloodthirsty, he should become a shochet, he should become a ritual slaughter, he should become a moel. There are always places for every bad talent. Even haughtiness. Haughtiness is a terrible talent. Holiness is a terrible midah. But the sages tell us, there's a verse in Torah that says, "Vayikbal libo b'darchei Hashem." I think it's the Torah. And he raised his heart to serve in the ways of Hashem. A person has to be brave. Avrohom Avinu, right, stood up to the whole world. That's Vayikbal libo b'darchei Hashem. He was proud of doing the right thing. That's how you use haughtiness.
Thank you.
Welcome. I didn't say that.
Any question?
No.
Okay.
Guess
Thank you,
not.
Rabbi Biderman.
Thank you, Rabbi Shemesh. Take care. That's it. I guess so.